people, it's me, Eco Chick, and I'm here with Mrs. Durant and Seymour and Snarky and Frowny Frog, who's not so frowny, and the Sack Fry. They are so active today. Check them out. See that big pile over there too? They're still piling up, but they are definitely adventuring out into their tank world a little bit for their tank life experience. Woo! And they're quick. Do you see that? So what do you notice today? What wonderings do you have? Any special thoughts of encouragement for these little ones? Well, let's talk about what's happening in the tank today, and then we're going to talk a little bit about habitat, and that salmon have more than one habitat, believe it or not. So check out our water quality. It's not looking super great. The ammonia level is showing some ammonia. We're probably, 0.25, maybe venturing towards 0.50. The pH is off the charts, so I'm going to have to change out some water. I did put in some pH down drops. That's just not really seeming to help, so I'm going to change out some water, see if that helps at all. We are, of course, at 53 degrees, our constant. The room is about 55 today, so a little warmer, but it's also a little bit warmer outside. And I'm going to show you the end of their tank habitat and talk a little bit about it. So this is, a salmon tank. It is a 10-gallon tank, and it is technically their habitat right now. This is a salmon habitat, a human-made habitat. And so if you look closely, I added rocks, there's gravel. The gravel in the river would actually be more like those bigger rocks. You can see the pretend river background, and so that's a new addition this year. I just thought they might feel better to have a little bit of darkness on the back of the tank, and it does look like a river bottom, so that's kind of cool. So yeah, so this is their tank-like habitat, and again, at a hatchery, they would not even really have something like this. They would just be starting to swim around in a big, huge tank with lots of other ones, and then slowly, as they're developing, they move them to another tank, and yeah, that's kind of what happens at a hatchery. And then eventually, they're released around the same time that the little par would start traveling down their stream and to a river, eventually an estuary, and ultimately the ocean, so they can, eat and grow, and hopefully not be eaten. And so, yeah, hatcheries, basically the little salmon live in the hatchery from egg until the par stage, and that's when they're released. And we release here in our mini hatchery, though, at the fry stage, the swim up fry. So they'll be out in their stream, hopefully having a better opportunity to imprint on that stream. So yeah, I'm going to take you over and just show you a couple of habitat pictures, and just talk a little bit about the habitat here in Oregon. So what you need to be aware of is that often salmon are born in a stream that looks kind of like this. It's really narrow, might have some falls, and they have to pay attention to what is growing around here, the smell of it anyway. Their sight is actually not their number one sense. They have a very strong sense of smell, and so these various plants and things around here will make a tea in the water, kind of, and that's what the little salmon, or really the adult salmon, eventually will remember and make their way back to. This is a picture of the Willamette River, and so most salmon that are in our area travel up the Willamette. They actually travel right through Portland. They come in from the ocean to the mouth of the Columbia. They find the Willamette River, and then they just keep sniffing and sniffing and swimming and hopefully making their way back. The salmon that are coming to Lake Creek actually travel, through a jetty in Florence. This is a jetty that sort of helps the salmon near the Columbia mouth. And yeah, so they'll make their way to the Willamette River and possibly into some wetlands or other ponds. Really, that's where they're going to hang out and eat and grow and eventually make their way out to the ocean. And the river bottom is super important. So different types of salmon look for different size gravel to make their reds. This is a picture of some sockeye salmon. We don't actually have sockeye in Oregon. They are really iconic in Alaska in particular, and they are in Washington as well. And so they are looking for a very specific size gravel to lay their eggs. This is actually a cool picture because it's showing underneath the water and above the water. So this is an example of the riparian zone that helps keep the habitat shady so they can, be at this stage and then grow up and eventually come back to some nice, cool, clean water. So check out the size of an egg and the size of the gravel. So yeah, that's a super important thing to notice because the salmon, the females, have to move those rocks or that gravel with their tails to make the reds. And so this is what they would look like out in the wild. And so sometimes you might be looking out into river and looking right at a salmon red and not realize it because it blends in so well. So just a tiny bit on this map. A young salmon are coming in. They're making their way into all these different rivers and streams, providing various habitats. When they're coming back, though, this is a super important part. So estuary. This is an example of an estuary. And so the amazing thing is that the young salmon, when they're in their fry stage and then they're developing into what's called a par, that's when they're making their way to try to find this place. And then they go through what's called a smoltification. So the estuary is the place where the freshwater and the saltwater meet. It's called brackish water. And this is a really super great example of how complex an estuary ecosystem or habitat is. So the small smolt would swim through here. They would eat and grow, and hopefully not be eaten by some of these various predators here. And then they make their way out to the ocean where they stay anywhere from 3 to 5 years if they're a Chinook. The various species stay out for different amounts of time. It just depends. And there's a lot of things out in the ocean that contribute to when they decide to come back. And when they're coming back, they eat for one last time. They get used to the water change from salt water to fresh water, and then they are ready to start spawning. And that means they're going to start swimming back upstream, smelling and sniffing, and maybe passing some streams along the way to find just the right one that's called their natal stream. It's where they're born. And yeah, it's just an important time in their life. So a couple more little examples over here. Here's an example of a river. So some salmon may be making their way far, far away from the ocean, and they'll have to sniff their way up. Here is a picture of the ocean, and so yeah, they have to swim against that current to make their way out into the ocean where they'll, spend their adult life, 3 to 5 years, and then they smell their way back to the exact river mouth that they left, making their way back to the river, through the estuary first though, and they might come across some of these predators along the way, maybe some fisher people. So yeah, the habitat for the salmon is just so important for their livelihood. And so while the females lay thousands and thousands of eggs in multiple reds. Only so many make it to that full adult phase. So yeah, but every part of their life cycle is super important to every habitat that they happen to be in. They are, after all, a keystone species, and the freshwater habitats and the saltwater habitats both rely on them, and they rely on the habitats. So take one more look at our sweet little sac fry in their tank life experience. This is their habitat for now. They're just so cool. All right, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful whatever you do. This is Eco Chick and the crew signing out. See ya.